Welcome to The Brain Factor, hosted by myself, Joy Riddle, and Laura Hawley. We're a part of Meridian Behavioral Healthcare, where we believe that wellness is within everyone's reach. This podcast is a conversation about what research-based protective factors look like in real life. Our hope is that you'll walk away with something that you can use in your own life and have had some fun with us along the way. So let's get started. Thanks for joining us on The Brain Factor today. This episode is the one about learning how to deal. And this one's kind of on the tail end of our last episode, which was about control and what we can control and what we can't control. And we decided that we needed to talk a little bit about what you can do to deal with all those things that you can't control.
Yes, because we discovered there were so many things that we can't control.
Yeah, and you promised that this episode you were going to help us to deal with all those things.
And it's helpful to me because it doesn't sit well with me when there's so many things that I can't control, but that's how life is, right? And that's the source of a great many of our stressors that we carry with us throughout our day, and that kind of stick around and stick to us, is because those things that we can't control they feel less actionable. Mm-hmm. And one of the takeaways from today is I want to explore ways in which they are actionable that might look different from other things.
I am really interested to learn about that.
Me too. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, so I think it's important first to talk about like why this is an important and worthwhile endeavor, the impact that stress has on our lives when we carry it around. Like, we know this, but it's still important to note, like, this impacts our sleep, this impacts our ability to be productive, it impacts our relationships. There is not a portion of our lives that I can think of that is not negatively impacted with the weight of stress. And the more stressors we are carrying around, the less fulfilling our life in general is going to be, right? So it's an important endeavor to really look at those things that we can't control. It's very tempting to just say, like, well, I can't control that, so I'm good. But saying that doesn't make it so.
Yeah.
Right? And that's some of that outside pressure that makes us feel like, well, we just have to accept those things.
And we're only talking today about that negative stress, not any of that good stress that gets us moving.
That's a whole different episode.
We're just talking about the things we can't control and that are putting stress on us, because we don't want her to become chronic stress.
Correct. Because chronic stress, now we get into not only being less productive or our happiness level, but now there's physical health implications from chronic stress that hurts our hearts, that hurts just all of our physicality, that can really show up in different ways. So there's really two ways that I want to talk about that we can deal, right? Because that's what we're talking about today, like, deal with it, right? And that is dealing with our response, which, we've been told since we were little, that's the only thing you can control is yourself, right? So dealing with our response, there are certain ways that we can address feeling better about situations. But then there's another category, and that's that direct action to address the specific stressor, right? Just because we can't control it doesn't mean we can't address it or deal with it in some way directly, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a more specific thing. But that general category, kind of starting there, that general category, there's a couple of things. There's four I really want to talk about tonight. And the first one, we've done a previous episode on before, and that's physical activity, right? Those benefits of physical activity. I can't, and I debated bringing that up today because we have unpacked that so fully in the past, but I don't think it can be stressed enough because people are so afraid of it. Right.
Yeah, and I think when we say physical activity, people already jump to right away, I don't want to go to the gym. Right. But we're talking about getting out in the fresh air and walking, moving your body, standing up. If you're sitting at a computer all day, get up, walk around, your office, get a drink, those types of things as well.
Yes. And that's the part that I really think is the important takeaway, is just moving your body, right? And that's such a known and accepted thing in our society today. Like, there's so much research and so much conversation about that. Like, pick up your phone. Like, we all have an app that probably came with our phone that counts our steps, right? Like we already know that this is important. And I bring up the phone app because I tell you, there was one day, so when I'm not traveling, when I'm not teaching and I'm not out there, I will work from home. And on the days that I work from home, there was one day I looked at my app and I had like 600 steps.
Yes, I've been there.
Like, that's not good, right? So my team at work, we participated in a fundraiser for supporting another agency where we clocked our miles. We could swim or bike or walk or run, kind of run. But we can do all of those things and clock our miles, right? So I'm competitive. So I was walking and I was out there and I was hustling and I was doing things. And I realized that I felt so much better that week.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking physically. Like the physical benefits is one thing, and how I felt physically, that's a whole separate conversation. I mean, like my calendar was properly filled out. My stuff was on time. I felt energized in meetings. Like I felt better mentally and emotionally when I was moving my body every single day on purpose. And so that's a really important piece of dealing, because
look, it's rid of fatigue quickly. When I start feeling fatigued, when I'm slacking a little and not working out as much, and I start to get fatigued and I'm in my office, I'm like, oh, I'll just get up and do 10 squats, and all of a sudden everything just like comes back. Yeah, I feel better. I can focus again.
Yep. And when we're in those moments where we have that fatigue and we have that sort of all those things that come with being sedentary, and a stressor enters our space, I mean, our coping level, our tolerance of that is so low, so low. So that's important, right? The movement piece is really important. Kind of hand in hand with that, because it's still our physical body, is that diet and nutrition piece.
Yeah.
Right. Through the lens of stress, not through the lens of like weight loss or any of the other reasons that we might look at our diet, right? This is a very specific thing. So do you ever notice a correlation between some of the things that you might eat or not eat and how you feel mentally?
100%. If I try to eat as clean as I can, I'm not perfect, obviously. But I can definitely feel if I eat something that's a processed carb, 10 minutes later, I'm crashing. I'm like, boom, I'm down. It physically impacts me. Sluggish. I don't want to get up and do things. I just want to get into the comfort zone and have some more pasta.
Right. You know, that's why I like pasta. Too. Like, I love that pasta. But pasta is a really good example, right?
Yeah.
So what I find interesting about the diet conversation, and by diet, I don't mean dieting. I mean like diet,
what you eat,
right?
What's in your meal.
So I'm on a long journey of sort of learning about my relationship with food, and it connects with stress, right? So it's not necessarily about categorizing foods as good and bad, although there are bad foods and there are good foods, right?
You know, I would argue that there's not. It's just how to use them.
But it's more, right. Yeah. It's more about how to use them, because when, like you said, carbs, right? Which everyone goes, oh, carbs, right? But there are times when you may reach for a healthy carb or a good carb, because that's what you
broccoli. I mean, there's lots of great carbs. And if you take that same pasta and have an appropriate amount with some protein and lots of veggies, it's not going to crush you the same way.
So I'm so glad you said broccoli, because did you know that broccoli is one of the foods that actually has properties in it that fight depression?
I did not know that.
I recently learned that. So broccoli, turmeric, salmon, those are the top three that have qualities in them that actually fight depression. So that becomes more about mental health and stress, right?
Yeah.
So it's depression and anxiety. It really helps with that part of our brain chemistry. When we are stressed, we tend to reach for foods that taste good, right? It's a comfort thing. And those are full of sodium and full of sugars and carbs.
Those hit your brain in the reward center and release serotonin. So they're going to make you feel better.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And so, and when we are hungry, we, it's been programmed in us since we were cavemen, right? Like we want to survive. So when we are hungry, we are on edge, because now we need to find food. And those
Now it's called hangry.
Yes, there are times when I'm just like, I can't. And I've learned that about myself, though, where if a particular task feels overwhelming, or I'm having an emotional response to someone's behavior or something like that, any one of those things that I can't control, sometimes I will pause and I will say, okay, let me just take a break. Let me eat something. Let me, that's part of sometimes some of my.
I think it's really interesting. Like the two things you mentioned so far were get more physical activity and follow a healthy diet to decrease your stress and improve your mental health. Mm-hmm. They're reciprocal.
Yes.
So if you're depressed and your mental health is, you're going to tend to go in these directions, and this is going to get more complicated. And if you're fine and you don't get these things, it might complicate that and bring you to that location as well.
And I think that it's just that awareness, right?
Yeah.
Knowing that is
either way.
So I've got to enter that circle at some point. Yeah. And I've got to figure that out. The other two things under diet that I want to mention before we move on to the others is to avoid caffeine, right?
No.
We're going to talk about boundaries.
We have to go now. This show is over.
Okay. Maybe not avoid. Let me rephrase that. Okay. To be consciously aware.
Minimize it. Stay within healthy guidelines.
Yes. So I am
I can get on board with that. I can get on board with that.
Good. So I'm a daily coffee drinker as well. Okay. I have to, and I feel, I don't know if it's valid or not, but I feel like I can't start my day without coffee. Yeah. Right. And that's okay for me. I have not seen any negative impacts from that. Right. But it does stimulate our central nervous system, and caffeine does affect everybody differently. Like our thresholds are different. Yeah. Just because you're a daily coffee drinker and I'm a daily coffee drinker doesn't mean that caffeine impacts us the same way all the time, right? As each other. And I'll give you an example. Everyone drinks cold brew, right? And so it's trendy and people like it. And I was like, I'm going to get a cold brew. And I got a cold brew and I felt like I was being electrocuted. I don't know how people drink that, right?
See, I could have a cup and go to sleep.
Right. And it doesn't mean that people who drink cold brew are going to be more anxious, but it does mean that if I drink cold brew, I'm going to be more anxious, right? So you have to learn what your personal thresholds are for that. But when we're feeling stressed, we're feeling overwhelmed, we have a lot of stressors, we have a lot of anxiety, lots of things we can't control. That's one of the things we should look at. We should look at movement. We should look at diet. We should look at our caffeine intake, and maybe we need to replace some of those caffeine drinks while we're going through this particular stressor. Same with vitamins. There are certain, and I think we've touched on this before, but there are certain vitamins that if you have a deficiency, they will mimic.
Like vitamin D?
D, that's a big one.
Yeah.
And B12 and iron. We kind of know about those, but D, not a lot of people know about yet. And that can mimic the signs and symptoms of depression. You can genuinely feel like you are slipping into a depression, and it's really just a matter of taking vitamin D. So looking at all of those things, I think is really, really important.
I know, just as an indicator, when I start getting a little grumpy, maybe at home, it's usually correlated to the fact that I'm not moving as much. I'm not working out as much. And my husband at some point will be like, are you go to the gym soon? Because automatically when I'm going to the gym, I'm eating better, my mood is better, or even not even going to the gym, but getting up and moving. Right. He's like, you're so much happier when you do that. I want that for you.
Yeah. So he communicates better than my husband. My husband would say, are you going to do anything today?
Yes. Well, those are fighting words.
Sorry, what?
No, I'm way too scary.
Like, oh, you want me to do something? I'm about to do something.
Yeah, well, what I'm going to start with doing is complaining about you. So let's get started.
So, but in addition, so there are two more things that I want to talk about under the deal part, and that is screen time. Yeah. Now, I don't want to get in the weeds too much with this because honestly, this is a whole separate episode that I really wanted to tackle one time.
Science.
However, it belongs under this greater conversation as well. And one of the things I want to point out is it's not just the content we're consuming. Again, that's a whole other thing, like social media and the impacts that all of that has on our health and wellness and stress. Like we saw that right before the cameras rolled, right? We were ready to go. And I got an email that came across my phone and I said, oh, hang on, I'm going to read this email. And I read it and it was news I was waiting on and it wasn't the news I was hoping for. And I put my phone down and Joy looked at me and said, you good? Right? Because everything kind of changed for a second, right?
Yeah.
So
I can read it.
Yeah. So what we're consuming matters, right? But beyond that, in terms of like the physicality of stress,
light,
it's the screens. And in our worlds, they're so unavoidable. I mean, I saw this TikTok video and I researched it, but this one I didn't research it, but I want to. Then we'll do that when we talk about this more in depth. But it was this little TikTok video where they said to put your phone in a black and white mode and you won't be as drawn to it. It's the colors, like colors in nature, like strawberries, like broccoli. Right.
The healthier foods are brighter, so they attract you. The same thing happens with computers and that type of thing.
Sure.
So it draws you right to it. And what this particular unresearched TikTok video said was that if it was in black and white, you're not as drawn to it. Interested be. I haven't figured out the setting yet, but I'm gonna test it.
Yeah, and we're gonna look into that.
And then I'm gonna look in the science behind it and like
that back here for sure. So I like that. So with screens, like how do we manage that when they're required? Again, we keep repeating this, but awareness level is so important. And again, it's built into our lives. There are screen time trackers on almost all of our devices. Pay attention to those. They're not just there for those of us who have teenagers, right? It's not just there to track other people's screen time. Track your own. Take a look at it, right?
Well, I spend 80% of my job at a screen.
Correct. Yep. And so mitigating some of that in our personal time, the parts that we can control, it can be important. And then the gap between the last time we looked at a 3-inch screen, 6 inches from our face, and the time we go to bed, right? We need some wind down time. Again, we're starting to see that
2 to 3 hours, something like that is mapped up.
Also starting to see that built into our lives too. Like, I don't know if your phone my phone has this setting with one of the more recent updates where it goes into sleep mode. It starts to wind down. So the contrast on the screen, the bright,
mine does
all of
that
that kind of changes. And then our text messages don't come through unless we go look for them, right? So the content piece is also being addressed. So that, again, this is a whole other topic we could spend an hour on, but I want to make sure that we're paying attention to screen time in terms of what our tolerance level and our threshold is going to be for stress. That's a big one. And then the last one is this like broader category that of mindfulness, yoga, meditation, all of those things.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, I tried yoga for the first time recently.
Did you? I've tried it a bunch of times. So let's talk.
No. Okay. So I tried yoga for the first time and I was shocked at how hard it was.
Very, very difficult. Yoga, Tai Chi, they look so peaceful and I go do them and I'm like, oh my God, I can't move now.
So I was with a group of people through work and we were doing this like staff retreat. So we go to do the yoga and I'm like, there was one move and I'm thinking to myself, oh no one can do that. So I look up, everyone's doing it but you. So I say that to say my body was not built for yoga, right? So I thought I would be. Well, here's what I just
Have to commit and practice.
So here's what I found. I thought I would hurt after. I felt so good. So good. I was shocked. I was equally shocked at how good I actually felt as I was shocked at how hard it was, right? So I was like, oh, this is a nice challenge. So moral of the story, I'm actually doing yoga regularly now.
Oh, good.
And I'm still not any better at it, so I'll let you know. But
yeah, I don't feel better at it.
But if
I've been doing it for years, I still stink.
But I feel good. I feel good, and I enjoy.
I'm like looking for the wall falling over.
Right? Yeah. Like, well, if I do 25% of what she's doing,
I'll be good.
Be okay. So we want to look at
that though.
Yeah. So I think that hits that movement piece, but also that specific yoga moves and stretching are really designed for our mental well-being, right? Physical and mental well-being. And it's so often paired with mindfulness techniques and is often paired with meditation. And there's YouTube videos, all kinds of stuff teaching how to meditate if you want to do that. And then, all of those things. So that's kind of what I wanted to share today about the pieces that are really looking at us. Like, how do I cope? How do I deal? How do I reduce or increase my tolerance level for stressors? But there's another side, right? And that's the directly addressing the stressors.
Oh, yes.
That sounds easier, but it's a lot harder because the number one
this is the goodness you promised us.
Yeah. So this is the number one thing there is boundaries. Is really having good boundaries.
Yeah.
Knowing how to put them in place and enforcing them.
Yeah.
This is a whole other episode that we are, I don't know when, but we are going to tackle boundaries at some point. But I do want to give kind of the headlines today and talk about it a little bit. Because I know you and I have talked, that is not your favorite topic.
No. It's I'm happy to talk about it, but it's not my favorite thing. Yes. Yeah. And my husband will not be allowed to watch that episode.
Perfect. Okay.
He always wants all kinds of boundaries or things.
So boundaries really come in two ways, and that's the learning how to say no.
Yeah.
And that's saying no to tasks, to commitments, to, all of that. And then also learning how to put individual boundaries in place with certain people.
So important.
Right? There are certain people for whom we need certain boundaries.
Yeah.
And it's not black and white. It's not, there are people that we can love and enjoy and have in our lives, and yet those people need to have certain boundaries that maybe don't even apply to some.
Sometimes it's just a combination of the two of them. I don't know if I've ever mentioned this on here before, but I have a great friend, one of my best friends for so many years, but there are just certain topics we don't discuss. And we've discussed that those are off the table for us. We're so close, but diametrically opposed on these couple of issues. So we just leave them alone.
To have made the conscious, and he's got a couple of really important things there, right? That like, it was a conscious decision. It was a conversation that was had. It was putting that in place. And from what I'm hearing, I don't want to make assumptions, but I'm hearing that went well. Oh, that's respected.
Went totally well. We're like 10 or 15 years post that decision.
Yeah.
And it's great.
Yeah. What makes boundaries so scary is that the things that we fear about putting them in place are often accurate, because that's not the ending everyone gets. Sometimes we put boundaries in place and it changes a relationship or it ends a relationship.
Well, on the things that we don't discuss, she can speak to about with other people, and I can speak to other people about them. It's just the two of us together, and that combination just doesn't work.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so, and I just think that's such a beautiful example of how boundaries can be successful, right? Mm-hmm. But it's hard. It's hard to take that leap. It's hard to say, okay, we have to have that uncomfortable conversation, and then we have to hold people to boundaries. And when it's unsuccessful, and by unsuccessful, I mean unsuccessful in the relationship, not unsuccessful for you. Because if you have held true to your boundary, that's a success, right? But some folks are going to make you feel or attempt to make you feel or behave as though you are holding a grudge or being unreasonable or any number of things that villainize you, right? When you're really just holding a boundary.
That's sort of gaslighting.
Yeah,
sort of.
So we're going to unpack all of that another time.
But we have so many topics.
Learning how to say no, having those boundaries, clear communication about those boundaries, and then sticking to it, right, are really, really important things for directly addressing stressors that are in our lives, like stressors that involve other people, right? That's a really key component. The other big one is avoiding procrastination. Very often, and I'm a huge procrastinator. I mean, for so many years when I was young, I wore it as like a badge of courage. Well, I work well under pressure. Mm-hmm. I work great under deadlines. No, I created my own deadlines by being a giant procrastinator, right? So now that's become habits that I have. And that's harder, particularly when you're not 20, right? Like changing habits that you've had for decades is really difficult. So avoiding procrastination, how do we do that? Like, how do you do that? Like, do you have any tools that you...
Yeah, I have a book, a planner, a scheduler type of thing, and it's mostly for personal stuff, but I'll usually sit on the weekend and in the margins on my calendar, I'll start 1, 2, 3. These are all the things that I have to get done. And I get a weird satisfaction at checking things off of that list, so it works well for me.
Got it.
But I try to think through all the things that are going to be roadblocks for the next week and try to address them while I can.
So I don't know if I think I've never told you this, but one of my biggest tools for anti-procrastination, I actually took from you.
Oh,
I took very cool. Literally took from you because when we worked together in your office at the time, you had a one sheet sitting on your desk. And it was the priorities for the day. Some of it had the week. And then you had this like tear off pad that had the months or the days or whatever. I bought the exact same one. I got it on Amazon because it had the flowers on and I liked it. I literally copied it exact. Because for me, a planner, I'm that person that buys the planner in January with all the color-coded pens and I fill out the first month and then I never open it again, right? With the tear-off sheets, I'm looking at my week. And what I've done is I've drawn a line through the center. So I look at my 2 weeks because I bill under service notes. So then I have my pay period, right? And then I rip it off and it's gone. And I start fresh.
I use that in the office. The other example was what I do at home.
So I do that. And so what my tool really is looking at it in chunks that are smaller. When I look at the totality of something, I either feel like I have plenty of time, so I procrastinate, or I'm like, oh, I'll never get that done. And so I hide from it, right? But when I do the block scheduling and I'm just looking at the tasks at hand, that really helps prevent me from falling down that hole of procrastination. So that's, in summary, that's how we deal, right? We deal in two ways. We deal by taking care of ourselves. That's all those self-care pieces, movement, diet, exercise, yoga, meditation, screen time, like really, really taking care of our physicality and our mental state. And then we also deal with the with those stressors by directly facing them, avoiding procrastination, putting good boundaries in place, holding to those boundaries. And I think the totality of all of that, there's also a great resource that you found recently I wanted to share before we go.
Yeah, if you go on to Meridian's website, this podcast is powered by Meridian, but mbhci.org, click on the resources tab and scroll down and you'll see this great coping activities worksheet that they have there. And it's broken out into different categories. So if it's on boundaries or avoidance or different things like that, you can look through and there's probably 20 different strategies under each category for you to be able to utilize. And we'll put that website on here for you, maybe show the form.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty good tool.
Awesome. Well, that's all the time we have for today, but thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of The Brain Factor, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to The Brain Factor. Joy and I are so thrilled to be having these needed conversations. We'd love to hear your feedback on this episode, so if you could drop a comment or leave a review with your thoughts or any requests that you may have, it would be appreciated. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Living a healthier and happier life starts with one step, and we're excited to be on this journey with you. Until next time.